Hi guys, my name is Paul Kroon. I'm your host in this video, and today we're going to talk about how to work with large lists in Power Apps. Let's say we have accounts or people or products which we have to use in our application. We want to store locally maybe, or we want to have all in the application when we start the application, but they exceed the maximum amount of records that SharePoint or Power Apps can handle. How can we still get all those records inside of our application, and even how can we optimize that speed? This video is all about those questions. So first let's look at a slide for the questions we are answering today. First, let's say we have SharePoint list larger than 5,000 records. And in my case, I have a people list of about 8,000 records, which I basically like to use in Power Apps during the session I have. Now then we encounter delegation issues, because basically we can't exceed the max 2000 records inside of our application, right? But is that really the case? I don't think so, so we gotta fix this. Then let's say we have existing list and we want to do it on those existing lists. We have to add something to a list to be able to do this, so I'm gonna show you how we can update those existing lists to be able to do the same thing without the problem of delegation. Then let's say 40 people use this application. Maybe we don't want all those users to have to load in all those 8,000 records. So we're gonna look in optimization. We're gonna basically, instead of 8,000 records, drill in just one record and work with that. So it's gonna be fun. Let's dive in. So first, let's show you what we will do today. So let's talk about the delegation. Delegation is a problem that we, for example, can't use the ID as a field to say ID should be higher than 2000, right? So that's not delegatable. So we can say, okay, drill in just sets of data after each other. So we have to fix the ID. What we're going to do there is just add a simple data field, just a number which we will use as an ID holder, which is delegatable. I'm going to show you right away. Then to make this very fast, we like to add an index there, because an index will assure that we help SharePoint to retrieve the data to us very fast if we ask the right question to SharePoint. So we're gonna do that also. Then maybe we have already existing list, and then when we add in a new column with a simple data type, that column is empty, right? So we first have to fill all those records. But then we have 8,000 records and we have to drill them in the application, and if we do that, we need a lot of time to have those 8,000 records in, right? So we're gonna have an approach which is basically the same logic as I did in 2 videos earlier when I talked about SAP and Oracle and showed you how to have one record which holding the data inside of a multi-line data field. We're gonna integrate here also. So we basically create a logic that once a day or once a week that data is updated based on the frequency we like to have the new data, and then that data is used by the other users which are opening the app between the two updates. Okay, it's gonna be fun. So let's go to SharePoint to show you in the browser what I mean. So first, and let's take my head off because you don't have to see me all the time. So first we have a list of more than 75,000 persons there, right? And as I said before, the ID we can't use as a filter, which is delegatable. That's not supported. So basically what we want to have all those records in is just an extra column. I already created it here, the ID int. And if we filter this ID int, and let's put it right besides the ID here, you see that the first 1500 already are updated. I'm gonna show you how you can update it yourself. Let's first check out the list settings here to see that we have more than 7,000 records. We have an ID field, which is just a basic number without decimals. And let's check out the index, because on this field I edited an index here, and an index is basically like a virtual sorting. And this virtual sorting will be used by SharePoint if we want to retrieve record based on this new number field, right? So the first challenge is then, let's click this away, to fill this ID field. Let's filter this again, it's too small. Then go to Power Apps to show you what we're doing here. And basically we have 3 steps. First is to have the IDs inside of this field. So we went to SharePoint, we created this column, and we gave this column an index. Then I have a basically simple formula which first collects a number of records to a collection, which is based on the ID int should be blank. So basically the blank is here a null value, and because there is nothing in our fields, everything, the first 500 will be retrieved. And then we update that first 500 fields with the ID int is the same as the ID. Simple as that. Next time we run this, we get the next 500 because the first 500 are filled with an ID, right? With a number. So what I do here, I import this 500 fields. Then I check if it's empty, because when it's empty, basically we have finished all the fields. We have to stop, and then we notify, okay, you are done. And if not, then we say, okay, we want to update this collection and set the ID to the ID int, which I do here. And I do just the update if I take all the records, because all the records are blank when we start, and I just say make the ID int the same as the ID. Then I have a notification that I start patching, just to show that we're starting, and a notification that we finished. And between that, I just patch to this data source my collection. My collection has the same schema and both have an ID. So basically the SharePoint connector and SharePoint is able to just match these fields and know it has the update fields, right? So let's run this formula. So we run this, see it's thinking, it's retrieving information. Then we get a notification that it's starting patching. And if we go to our list, we wait, we see that those ID ints coming in. So basically we have to do this till we have all the records done and all the records have an ID int. If we of course have a new table, mostly we don't know that records are going to be this big probably, so then we have to do it later. But if we know it by forehand, we have to add this ID field here. Then we can do several things. We can say we make a Power Automate. It's basically on creation on our record. That's this ID. But I ain't gonna cover this here, but it's surely a possibility. We can also go to SharePoint and in a form where we patch something, patch the ID with it. Surely a solution also. But I think I'm gonna have an approach because it's about accounts or people, and I think there are not a lot of extra records added in one day, right? So we're gonna later incorporate this formula just in retrieval of our new data set for that day. But we're gonna do that later. So now you saw we have 2002 records here, and I set the limit in this app on 500 to make this a little bit smaller. But when we get those records, we can see that we have those 970 records. Probably I delete some. We get those into our application. And if we patch again, patching 500 records, you can see them coming in. And we are done. If we now get this record again, you will see that we have about 2,500 records, right? Now, how can we retrieve this? As I stated before, it's not possible to use the ID for this, but now we have a field which is basically how do you say that? It's basically delegatable, right? So we use that ID int with the same number as the ID, and we can do greater as 0. This is delegatable. So here we put those records into a collection. So we retrieve the first 500 records, or 2000 if we set the limit to 2000, which I always encourage to the people where I work with. And no, it's not a performance leak, believe me. Then I have a width formula, which is a scope formula, and I first get the max ID based on the ID of the next record in our collection. And then I collect the next 500, because this is going to be 500, and next one is going to be 1000 and 1500, etc. So this will just retrieve all the records and put this in a collection, right? So now we know we can have this collection into our Power Apps. So it's no problem anymore to have more than, if we want 20,000 records inside of our application. No problem at all. We can just get as many records in there if we like, by this logic. But then comes the next question, because we talked about optimization, right? Let's say we have 40 people or 100 people or 1,000 people running the app every day on their browser or on their PC, and they have to drill in this information every time. We don't want that, because that's bad for performance, right? But maybe we really need it. So I always say functionality above performance. If we need it, we need to retrieve it, even if it crashes performance, right? Because else we just have a not working app. But can we update this? Now, 2 videos ago, I showed you that we can have, for example, information from outside systems, and we just create one record here with a date and a title and a multi-line column. And in this multi-line column, if we open this, we have a CSV formatted string. The headers, a first line, second line, and the lines are all separated. And we drill it into the application. We will do the same here. The only thing what we do different is that when we retrieve that information, we will store this inside of this external data field. And when other people during the day log in, use this field to build our collection instead of retrieving from the list directly. So what we can do is here store to date, and if we run this, you will see all the 2,500 records are loaded in. And if we go to this area, we see that there is an extra row just created, and there are all our items, all our people, dummy people are in this list. And then the next people using this application will use this file. And let's say when it's tomorrow and this is the file of yesterday, the first person logging into the system will retrieve that information from the real list, update this record, update the data, and then the other people use that data set again. So just one person has to load everything in, and we can do that on the background. So they don't really have a problem with that, because it just takes a few seconds for them to load then in the first time. So let's check out how I did this. So what I do, I have a variable which is going to hold a record, because it's going to have the current record or the new record. Then I have a width formula in there. I say first, look at the data source if we have a record already existing, and retrieve that in this temporarily variable, which is only there within the width formula. Then I take a lot of things out, which I'm just going to show you later on. But what I do now is just I'm going to patch this record and you see I use the ID as the current ID. So if we have a current data, if there is a record, it's going to update this. If there is no record, it's going to create a new one because that ID is blank. And of course, that ID is not there in the data source yet. And this is better than a lookup because then we just say to the data source, here you have an ID, figure it out yourself instead of first having a call to retrieve if there is a record at all, right? And then we just have a record in the right schema with the title for people, because this is also with an update is mandatory, so we need to do this. Then we say we have a date int, and we set the date of today, just the value with the years, month, and date, because that is international, right? And then we have a header file and a concatenation of the collection we just retrieved in the previous step, where we say, okay, first add a char. So after the first line, there's going to be a char, and then put in our text. And when we have another record, first put in a char, then the text. So we get a CSV file with lines, and in that line, comma separation, because we concatenate all this data with just that comma as a CSV. Then we retrieve this, patch to this record variable, and with this record variable, we create a collection. And again, a scope formula where we first split the data column with a char, so we get an array of lines. Then we take all the lines except for the first, loop through those. Every line we convert to an array with a split function on that comma separation. And then we create just one record with the values in the right place and with the right keys. So these are key value pairs, right? As in a JSON. And after this, we have a collection which we can sort and we can use inside of our Power Apps with ease. You see here all the records nicely organized in a collection. And that's basically the 3 steps we have to perform. We have to integrate to be able to do this kind of things. So let's look at an example that I combine this everything. So this you can set on app on load, or maybe as I do, make an event or an action bar and then put in a toggle or a button which you just trigger. So you separate this loading from the loading of the app itself. And the reason for that is that we want to show something to the user, the loading screen, as soon as possible. We don't want them to wait in the loading screen of Power Apps. That's the whole idea. So here I say I have that variable again. I look for a current record, and then I check for the date. If that is that the same as today, then basically I just say that record you can return, and I do nothing else. That's why the second person on the day will just retrieve one record, right? Because we have to look up. If this is yesterday or before, and we need to update, and this is only the first person, then first we say, okay, the current data ID is that blank. Because when this is blank, we don't have to do anything because there is no record yet, right? If it isn't blank and there is a people record here, this area, then we want to update this date. Then here, what I do is retrieving the new records. So I say, are there new people or new accounts created yesterday after that we updated this? Those ID ints will be blank, right? So maybe these are 4 or 5 people, 6 people a day. So this is going to be very fast to perform. But I now have a make it a text block or a comment block, because we didn't do the update on all the records, right? Because then this would now take 500 records instead of just 5, which it normally would be. That's why I errored this out. But let's say there are 5 new records, then this is going to be retrieved. If this is not empty, it's going to patch those people imported. And here you see I have to update if on blank ID record ID. I have this just integrated in one simple line. So this is already a updated collection which I'm gonna retrieve here. So I'm gonna update this. This is gonna maybe take half a second, and then I know that all the ID-ins are available. So I'm gonna collect all records. So I first take the first line, and then I say, instead of all those lines in my example, I just say, okay, do a sequence. Run this 10 times. And 10 times I take the max ID and I do a collection of this. And of course I could optimize that to say, okay, how many sequences should I do, or is this empty? But it's just one time a day, so I basically don't care that it's gonna take 10 calls, because calls which are empty aren't very how do you say that, don't have a lot of impact on performance, right? And it's just one time a day, so I find it for easy of reading, I just leave it like this. Then I have those people records, so normally 7,000 records, in my case on this moment 25, and I'm gonna patch this record again, and I'm gonna set the date to today, and I do the concatenation again to create that CSV with line feeds and comma separation. And this is then returned to this variable. Then I have the variable with the latest update in the record, and that data column there, I do the same thing. I'm first gonna split it on line feeds, then I'm gonna loop through those lines, except for the first. With this formula, then we're gonna have each line comma separation, split it on the comma, and then we create a record. And that's basically it. So now let's say this should be yesterday, the 8th. And now let's simulate that this is run for the first time in a day. And of course we use a button now to trigger this, but normally we can trigger this based on a toggle or app on start, and just with the loading of the app, let this be performed. So now I have my action open. We have a people list of yesterday, and the first people loading this in, you will see it takes a little bit longer because it's retrieving that one record. It's going to update this, and it's going to then take the 2500 records. And here you see it's 29. So the first takes about 1.5 seconds to perform this logic and to really save this one record to my external data import source, right? Now let's say we duplicate this application and the second person. And here is the optimization, because this second person and all the other ones after this will just drill in 1 second. In a matter of tens of seconds, we have those 25 records, right? And every time we do this, this is very fast. So what we now did, resume, and what we did is that we basically have a solution to have a simple column for our filtering to get all the records. Then we update the records we don't have in this formula. We create this CSV file here, and this can go up to 65,000 characters, so this can hold a lot of counts. When you have 1 million, you have to do something else, of course, but this can take a lot. And we drill this in for all the other loads of this application. And now we have it every day, and I think this is fine to do. But we can also say we only want to update this once a week, and then our formula on checking the date will be a little bit different, right? So that's no problem at all to do. And I think this concludes this video. I think I showed you that it's fairly easy to update your list, so we can basically drill in more than 2000 records. We can exceed that limit, and also have optimization to basically have 20,000 records imported in a matter of tens of seconds, right? So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.